Meteor ship.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Spook Notes podcast, where we get academic about everything that goes bump in the night. My name is Murph, this is Gurf, and we're going to be talking about some spooky shit. Yeah.
Specifically Stephen King.
Which is like the master of horror and who gives inspiration to ghosts and stuff.
The king.
The king. Ha. Of horror.
So,
yeah.
Obviously, Connor and Marlena here.
Yep.
We're back. We've been away for a little bit, but...
Shady's back.
Coming back. Stephen King's
again.
birthday is coming up, so we decided to...
do like a little friggin' thing for our homeboy Stephen King, so...
Exactly, do an episode about Stephen King. So what we decided to do for this episode is, instead of just choose one movie like we usually do, we decided that we would each choose a movie to do and kind of teach each other about the movie that we each picked.
Mm-hmm.
So originally what we were going to do is not tell each other what movies we were doing until the day of the podcast. However, I found out what Marlena's movie was.
Yeah, this is what happened. So I sent Connor my notes, and he looked at them.
Well, I had to open them.
And it said blank movie notes, because I'm dumb. So he kind of found out, and that's a little bit of my fault, but that's okay. It's fine.
So, Marlena, what movie are you going to be teaching me about today?
Well, as if you don't know it already, I'm going to be talking about the movie Misery by Stephen King, which is actually based on the original book, also called Misery. So I'm just going to kind of jump right into it. You know, Connor, feel free to, share your opinions and stuff.
We both love this movie.
We do. But we will get into that later. First, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty, and then we're going to talk about why we like it and stuff. So, Misery is a 1990 American thriller based on the Stephen King book written in 1987. The movie stars James Caan, Kathy Bates, Lauren Bacall, Richard Farnsworth, and Francis Starnahagen. This movie is directed by Rob Reiner. And
frequent King collaborator.
Yes.
He also made Stand By Me and...
Well, I was going to get into that, but thank you for that little, preliminary info. So this is kind of where the movie became to be, like the film inspiration. So basically, the producer of the movie, Andrew Strymon, actually read Stephen King's novel Misery on an airplane and was like, holy fuck, we should make this a movie. And he later recommended it to his director and partner at Castle Rock Entertainment, our boy, Rob Reiner.
And Castle Rock Entertainment is named after the town from Stephen King's books.
Yeah, so there you go. Stephen King is like all about this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't actually want anybody else to direct this movie, just because in the past, his movies have been kind of like not so good. Like the book to film adaptations like have not been so good. So
like The Shining.
Don't even go there. Like the book, whatever. We're not getting into this today. But yeah, so basically he only wanted to let Reiner do this because he really liked how he portrayed his book, The Body, into the movie Stand By Me, which was filmed in 1986. So the budget of the movie Misery was $20 million, and it made $41.3 million. And in total, $61.3 million, like, altogether. Mm-hmm. So it had profit of $40 million. Mm-hmm. Math. So the film received critical acclaim for Bates' performance as the psychopathic Annie Wilkes, and Bates won the 1990 Academy Award for Best Actress in her role, making Misery, as of 2018, the only Stephen King adaptation to be an Oscar-winning film. Which is actually crazy, because, like, this guy's got some really, really cool, like, freaking movies.
Oscar winning is the important word there, because, as we'll discuss with my film, other films by Stephen King have been nominated for Oscars.
Oh. Anyways, I'm gonna educate Connor on the synopsis of the movie. even though he's already seen it, but, you know, just, you know, feel me out here, guys. Okay, so basically, this guy, Paul Sheldon, is the author of a successful romance novel series featuring the star character named Misery Chastain. So, Paul, wanting to focus on more serious stories, he writes a manuscript for a new novel that he hopes will launch his post-Misery career. So this guy, like, you know, he was really successful with his whole Misery books, but he kind of wants to get past that, you know, start a new chapter, haha, pun intended, of his life.
Because he feels kind of like, especially I've read the novel as well. In the novel, it gets into how he feels like the Misery books aren't really like high quality books, but they just sell a lot. That's why he wrote so many, and he wants to become more of like a serious author and wants the critics to take him seriously.
Yeah, so basically, this guy travels from Silver Creek, Colorado, to his home in New York City. So Paul is going through a blizzard, and his car flies off the road, and he gets into this huge accident that kind of leaves him unconscious. So thankfully, or unthankfully, I don't know how you look at it, a nurse named Annie Wilkes finds Paul and brings him to her remote home. So Paul regains his consciousness and finds himself badly broken, unable to walk, and bedridden. So his savior, Annie, claims to be his number one fan and talks a lot about him and his novels. Out of gratitude and, you know, thankful that he had saved her, Paul lets Annie read one of his new manuscripts. While feeding him, she is angered by the profanity in his new work and spills soup on him. This is probably the first incident where she shows kind of like violence towards him, but you know, she apologizes. Soon after, Annie reads the latest Misery novel and discovers that Misery, the main character, actually dies at the end of the book. Thus, Annie flies into, like, you know, she just goes batshit crazy and goes into a full-on rage mode. And she reveals to Paul that nobody knows where he is and locks him in his room. So from there on out, Paul needs to be sneaky for planning a way out. So I'm not going to talk about the end of the movie because, you know, spoilers. And I want you guys to see this movie if you haven't already. If you have seen the movie, you guys know what happens at the end. You get it. So yeah, that's kind of like a little bit of background information on the movie. I hope you learned a lot, Connor. So the movie, being reviewed by the public, received actually a relatively good score. For instance, on Rotten Tomatoes, it received a score of 89%. On IMDb, it received an 7.8 out of 10, and on Metacritic, it received a 75. So overall, it was a well-received movie by the public and all of its critics. Yeah, so now we're kind of gonna get into, you know, the beef of the Spook Notes podcast, where we're gonna, you know, break down like the themes and, you know, stuff. So to start off, I kind of want to break down the name of Paul Sheldon's character in his novels, which is Misery Chastain. So yeah, like the reason why I wanted to kind of break this down or try to break it down was because that's just a really weird name to name a character of a novel. Like, what is this guy's reasoning? So obviously, misery kind of refers to, well, the obvious, being that it's unpleasant, right? Like misery, like, oh,
sad and
all that jazz. So Chastain. Now, I couldn't really find a concrete definition on Chastain, but what I did find was for chasten. So chasten refers to any misfortune and having a restraining effect on something, which is kind of applicable, being that, you know, Paul Sheldon is involved in a misfortune. He gets into a car crash and, you know, is being restrained. So this could kind of refer to how Paul feels about the Misery novels. He feels restrained by them and unable to start a new series. Annie reinforces this by physically restraining him to the bed and making him write a new novel about the same character in which he wants to forget. As such, he is made to feel miserable of having to write more about such character. Thus, Misery Chastain. I don't know.
That makes sense to me.
I thought that was just pretty cool.
And it's like it's also when you hear Chastain, you also think of like chaste and stuff, and obviously chaste referring to like you're not allowed to have sex, like usually in reference to a religious context like nuns and priests, and in a way they're also restrained and trapped in their rules. So I think it all circles back to that and makes sense.
Yeah. One of the major themes that I was trying to discover or trying to look more into was control versus lack of control. So obviously, Annie Wilkes represents control, being the one that she's, kind of doing everything for Paul, whether that, be caring for him, like bandaging him up, making him food. She's in control of the situation. Where on the opposite side, Paul represents a lack of control, being that, because he got into such a terrible accident, he doesn't have the ability to kind of take care of himself. So he kind of has to put all of his trust in this stranger. So
what I think is interesting about that as well is that even though Annie is physically in control of the situation and Paul is not, in a way you could say, and on an individual basis that, and on a mental basis that Paul is the one in control because he's in control of his mind and his thoughts, and Annie isn't because she's very erratic and can like switch very quickly from happiness to anger and stuff. So in that sense, she's not really in control of her self and or her emotions, but Paul is. So
that is true.
Even though she's physically in control, Paul is mentally and emotionally in control.
Well, in the end, Paul kind of is like the control in the situation for getting himself out of the house, right? Like he kind of.
And he's forced to only use his mind because his body is useless.
That's true. Wow, I did not think of that. And here I am supposed to be edumacating you. Another major theme that I thought of was household role reversal. So Paul Sheldon represents the subservient woman who is confined to the house, is meant to follow the rules of the husband, or else they will be punished. And opposingly, Annie Wilkes kind of represents a more masculine role, being the one that she has to go out, and do stuff and bring home the bread and butter and all that, like she kind of represents a more manly role in the household. And I don't know, I just thought that was very interesting to see something like, role reversal switched. Do you have anything to add on that?
No.
No. Okay. Another major theme is feelings of being trapped or confined, just because of the obvious, Paul Sheldon is kind of confined to a bed. So I thought this could maybe be an allegory for writer's block. Feelings of being trapped in one's own mind and having that sense of feeling like hopelessness and anger and sadness, like kind of an allegory for writer's block. So this could have to do with having that internal conflict of what to do, what to write, or what not to write. Feelings of being trapped or confined could kind of refer to mental illness. Again, feelings of being trapped in one's own mind, maybe referring to Annie Wilkes. I'm sure she's facing a lot of internal struggles.
And I think she's clearly mentally ill.
Oh, yeah. Obviously. Feelings of being trapped or confined being applicable to feeling like an outcast in society or family. Annie Wilkes lives a secluded life to hide her differences and obviously mental instability, as we mentioned before. And I also said feeling trapped in the story of the book. And I thought this was most applicable to Annie Wilkes because it's almost like as if she lives through the characters in the book and behaves as if they're real people.
She certainly reacts to their deaths as if they're real people.
Exactly.
And she even she almost tries to make them a part of her her real life, in that she names her prized pig Misery.
Yeah.
So it's like that you're creating a connection that doesn't really exist, and it's kind of unhealthy.
That's true. Maybe she creates that connection just to try to fill a gap or a void that's missing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I also said maybe she makes this association because she's so unsatisfied with the outcomes in her own life that she finds pleasure in the characters in the story. So maybe she thinks of herself as an extended character outside of the story. Also, this kind of ties in with mental illness. Maybe Annie is unable to separate fiction from reality. And this, I looked a little bit more in depth with this specific concept. So it's called delusional disorder. And like, I'm no psychologist here, but I do think she, exhibits symptoms of this disorder. So, delusional disorder affects people by making it difficult for them to distinguish between fantasy and reality. Symptoms of this mental disorder include irritability, hallucinations, mood swings, and other physical and psychological effects. The specific stream of delusional disorder that I think Annie Wilkes has is called erotomaniac. So, this delusional disorder centers around a person's belief that someone that is usually famous is in love with them, and that's kind of exhibited through, she believes that, oh, Paul Sheldon loves me, because I'm caring for him and all
And
that
she
stuff.
certainly loves him.
Yeah, so I think she's kind of, seriously mentally ill. Like, she can't dissociate between fiction and reality, and then she also believes that this author, that whom she's never known before, is clearly in love with her, because in her own head, because she's his number one fan, maybe she is his, or wait, you know what I'm trying to say, right? Like,
that the feeling is reciprocated when it's really not.
Yeah. So I don't know, that was kind of some of the themes, like, I discovered, or I thought of for the movie Misery.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're kind of just going to talk about our own opinions of the movie.
Well, actually, before that, I just want to say there's certainly
sorry.
That's okay. There's certainly something I thought about when I saw this movie and reading the book and whatnot, is that well, one, I just think it's interesting, the duality between Paul and Annie, and how they compare and contrast of each other, and they're so different, yet like two people who are forced into this situation together by Annie. And I think that's like an interesting to watch. That makes the film so successful for me. And another thing that I think you might be interested in hearing is that a lot of this story also has to do with the relationship between a writer and his fans. So Stephen King famously often writes many of his characters as writers, being that he is one. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is that this book was written shortly after he wrote a book called Eyes of the Dragon, which was kind of like this like fantasy, like Lord of the Rings-esque book that was like not a horror at all. And it actually got like, people hated it because it wasn't horror, and they were like, oh, just write horror, we don't want this stuff. And he was kind of angry at his fans at that time because he wanted to break out of just being like, oh, just the horror guy, and write different things. So he kind of wrote this book almost in response to that, because in this book it definitely features a writer and a fan who won't let the writer write what he wants and makes him stick to what they're famous for and what they're known for.
That's true.
So it kind of like mirrors Stephen King's own life, even though not nearly as extreme.
Yeah. That's really cool. I did not know that.
Yeah.
So yeah, as I was mentioning before, we're kind of just going to get into our own personal opinions on the movie. So I'm going to start off first. I really, really like this movie. That's why I picked it for this particular podcast. I don't know, I thought this movie did a really good job of keeping me on edge the whole time. Like, I was, like, gritting my teeth, like, especially during that one scene where Annie Wilkes takes the sledgehammer to his ankles. Fun fact, did you know that, well, you read the book, that she was supposed to have an axe and actually cut off his feet, but they thought that was too gory and too grotesque for the movie, so they settled on just breaking the ankles.
Yeah, in the book, she cuts off I think it's his right foot, and then cauterizes it with a blowtorch.
Ew.
And then at a later point, she also takes an electric knife and cuts off, I think, one of his fingers. I think his pointer finger.
This woman is nuts. Yeah, I don't know. I really like this movie. It also played on a fear of claustrophobia for me. Feelings of being trapped and you can't escape. And, like, that's something I really, like, get anxious over, like, for me, if I had to be strapped in that bed, like, I would be panicking.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm like, when I'm watching it, I'm thinking like, oh my god, what if that was me? Like, holy crap. And that's why I really, really enjoy this film, because, you know, it's scary.
It's effective.
Yeah. Yeah. What did you think about it?
Well, I like the movie a lot too. It's definitely probably my top 5 favorite Stephen King movies. I mean, obviously, Kathy Bates as Annie Wilkes is like so good, but at the same time, I also really like James Caan as Paul Sheldon, and I think that they really work off of each other really well. Because if you had two actors who weren't as engaging as these two are in this movie, it would kind of get boring, because it's basically, for most of the movie, it's just those two in the one room. That's why I think they also did a play of this movie.
They did, yes.
And it works really well as a play.
I remember reading about that, yeah.
I
would be down to see that.
Yeah, so anyways, I love Kathy Bates, but I also love James Caan as well, and I think that they do really well together, and that's what I really love about this movie.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Well, thank you for teaching me so much about Misery.
No problem. It's like you've seen it
here.
already.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to transition into my movie. While I do that, what is your top 3 favorite Stephen King movies, now that we're talking about Stephen King?
Well, obviously I enjoy The Shining,
Mm-hmm.
even though I think the book is better, but we'll save that for a later podcast. Misery. And a more recent one that I actually watched was Pet Sematary. I really, really liked that one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was very effective, especially the imagery and all that stuff. I really liked that. So, which one did you pick?
Well, for my top 3 favorite Stephen King movies obviously are The Shining as well.
Yep.
Number 1. Number 2 would be Creepshow. Love that movie. And then number 3 would probably be the movie I picked, which is Carrie.
I knew. It was like, okay, guys, we were trying to like figure which, when we picked out. I thought it was going to be The Dead Zone, because it's actually filmed in Niagara-on-the-Lake. And fun fact for you guys, we actually recently moved to St. Catharines, which, is right next to it, like about a 10-15 minute drive. And I thought, for the life of me, he was going to pick The Dead Zone. But you didn't.
I picked Carrie.
Okay. Let's hear it.
So, Carrie from 1976. The first Stephen King book to ever be published. It was also the first Stephen King movie to ever be made. So, Carrie is a movie about a girl named Carrie White, a shy, friendless teenager who is sheltered by her domineering, religiously fanatical mother. And Carrie actually has latent telekinetic powers, which she unleashes after being humiliated by her classmates at her senior prom. And even though, without saying the ending of this movie, I think everybody knows the ending of Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's that iconic, that image of Sissy Spacek covered in the blood. Everybody knows that image, I feel.
And if you don't, then you gotta watch the movie after this episode.
So, others' opinions. It has a 7.4 on IMDb, 93% on Rotten Tomatoes critic-wise, and a 76 by the fans, and 85% on Metacritic. So what I noticed about this movie when I was researching is, unlike most horror movies we talk about on this podcast, which are usually hated by critics when they are released, this movie actually received largely positive reviews, and even at the time, like in 1976, was considered one of the best movies of the year. Roger Ebert, very famous critic, called it an absolutely spellbinding horror movie and gave it 3.5 out of 4 stars. And then prophetically, people at the time even said that it would be written and argued about for years to come. And indeed, it still is considered usually in the top 50 horror movies of all time. So, I did find some interesting background information and facts about the movie that I wanted to share.
Mm-hmm.
So it was directed by Brian De Palma, who directed Scarface, The Untouchables, the first Mission Impossible movie. It was written by Lawrence D. Cohen, who also wrote the Carrie remake, the It miniseries, and the Tommyknockers. So a lot of Stephen King stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen King also has a story credit on the movie. So it stars Sissy Spacek, obviously, as Carrie, who recently returned to the world of Stephen King in the new series Castle Rock, which we should watch. Piper Laurie
I
as
love how all the Stephen King, things like kind of all puzzle themselves together. I love that.
yeah, it's
So
very
good.
interesting.
Okay.
Piper Laurie as Margaret White, Carrie's mom. Very early film performance by John Travolta as the bully Billy, and it has one other actress who you may know, and it PJ Souls. Do you know who that is?
Nope.
What if I said totally to you?
Oh my god.
Yeah. It's
Yes.
that chick from Halloween.
You just had to say that, and I'm like, yes.
Another thing I found interesting about this movie is that even though it came out in 1976, it was rated R.
Really?
Which you wouldn't expect.
Well, I kind of see it with like the whole blood and then like, throwing knives at her mom. Maybe that could do something.
That's true.
It's
Also
definitely
has
not rated
nudity in
G,
it.
guys.
It also has nudity in it.
Yeah,
In the opening
that's right.
locker
has
room scene.
A boob.
Or two. So yeah, as we said, it was the first Stephen King movie. Stephen King was only 26 when the movie was made, and he received $2,500 for the film.
Nice.
But obviously, it helped him a lot to become more of a household name, and that's what really was important about the movie. Stephen King was recently asked about the movie Carrie, and he thinks that it is still a good movie, but says that it is very dated to watch now because of the fashion and the technology in the film.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It's a classic.
Well, I mean, it's over 40 years old. It's 42 years old, so.
Wow.
So, the film made over $34 million, which was considered a huge success. And going back to your Oscar thing, both Sissy Spacek and Piper Laurie were nominated for Best Actress and Best Supporting Actress, respectively, at the Oscars that year, but neither won. And nobody would win for a Stephen King movie until
Our
Kathy
girl,
Bates.
Kathy Bates.
And also, like Misery, another mirroring, there was also a stage play done of this movie.
You know what, Connor? We got to see these plays.
Well, I mean, I don't think they're still going on.
No, we got it. Well, we'll see them.
Another famous fact is the ending of this movie, very iconic. And I mean, like, the very ending, when the hand comes out of the grave, it inspired a lot of horror movies, including Friday the 13th.
I was
that came 4
just
years later.
just gonna say that.
That is the direct inspiration. Sean S. Cunningham said, he's like, we need a jump scare at the end of our movie, just like in Carrie.
Nice.
So.
Well, also, man, which one? It's Jason versus Freddy, right? Where you see Jason's hand or something.
Let's Jason Goes to Hell.
Yeah.
Part 9.
Yeah, it's like that too.
2 other fun facts I found was that the actress who played Chris, the one female bully, that she went on to later marry the director, Brian De Palma.
Wow. Carrie, is bringing people together.
And, well, one thing that I just found was really interesting was that in the movie when Margaret White, Carrie's mom, is citing all those Bible passages, because she's kind of going crazy and like being like, oh, in Job 3:4, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Apparently those were all made up.
Really?
None of those are real, and this was done to kind of like add to Miss White's like craziness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, getting into the meat and potatoes, the themes of this movie. So there's a few big themes I found, 3 main themes. The first being bullying. So bullying is obviously a central theme in this movie. We can obviously view this in the finale where Carrie murders all of her classmates as a direct one-to-one result of her being bullied. But she's also bullied not only physically but psychologically, and not only at school but also at home by her mother. Carrie is often bullied directly by her classmates and her mother, and indirectly. And an example of this is when, at the beginning of the movie, when the principal of the school can't remember Carrie's name because she's just that forgettable. That's kind of a form of indirect bullying that people don't even think about sometimes. Carrie obviously exhibits classic symptoms of low self-esteem. She fears bullying when none is present, like when Tommy asks her to the prom. And she is often seen walking head down, hands held tight around herself, not freely like a normal happy person would.
It's almost like in a protective stance, right?
Yeah, because she's just kind of like always afraid. And the thing Well, what's interesting about this is that Stephen King uh, wrote this because sadly it's what often is seen at school in real life, and Stephen King was a teacher before he became a writer,
Hmm.
and I think that you see that he saw this a lot in his real life job.
Telekinetic, you know, chicks. Yeah.
Well,
Well, who
bullying.
knows?
um, and then obviously he takes it a step further to kind of examine the results bullying can have on a person's psyche who is already mentally broken and has way too much power.
Mhm.
So in the movie, the one time Carrie feels like she belongs and is actually liked is the same time that the ultimate bullying occurs, which was what makes it so much worse.
Yeah.
At the moment when the pig's blood is dumped on Carrie's head, in her mind, she realizes that her mom was right, that they were all going to laugh at you
We're all gonna laugh at you.
all along. And the result of this is obviously the murder spree by a girl who, by all accounts, should have lived a normal and happy life. So in the film, Carrie uses her psychological powers to barricade her fellow classmates in an enclosed space and kill them all. Sadly, what makes this movie still resonate to this day is that is an image that we see almost weekly in North
Yeah.
America.
I was just gonna say.
Except in reality, it's not a person with telekinetic powers, it's a bullied person with a gun.
Wow, Connor, that was deep.
I mean, it's when you watch that finale. I think that in 2018 you can't help but think of
Like shootings,
that stuff happens in real life.
especially in the States. Like it's unbelievable of how many shootings actually occur.
And they're all because of a person that most people would say, oh, they're so nice and normal, just being bullied too much and being pushed over the edge.
Yeah. And it's usually those people like you don't even know what goes on in their life.
Kind of like how
Right.
nobody knew what happened with Carrie at home.
Exactly.
So that's why I think that this movie is so effective, because it is still relevant today.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it's probably more relevant today than it was before, because there was shootings in the 70s and before this, but I mean, they weren't nearly as often as they are now.
That's true.
So that's what I think makes this movie so effective, and I think what makes the theme of bullying that is so strong in this movie still resonate today. So another major theme that I found was the theme of puberty. Obviously, I'm no expert on female puberty, but the themes in this movie make it clear that the events in this movie are caused by the onset of puberty.
Mm-hmm.
I think. To begin with, obviously, for the first time, we are introduced to Carrie. It's also the first time she is experiencing her period.
Yep.
And because it's something her mother never taught her about, she is confused and upset by it. And it's also the first time that we see her being bullied. Right?
Yeah.
So, because of that, from the outside of the movie, for Carrie, it establishes a direct connection between puberty and negative experience. Puberty leads to bullying.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Both in school and at home, because later on, when she does go home, she tells her mom, and her mom's like, "Oh, it's a sin," like
Exactly. Her mom doesn't see it as a natural biological thing. She sees it as
she's like, "What did she say? Eve was weak and all this
it's
stuff."
because of
and,
that original sin idea.
Yeah.
So, and also what I find interesting is that shortly thereafter, after we see Carrie experiencing her period, it's also the first time she shows her telekinetic abilities, and she seems surprised by that. So we can kind of assume that her powers are brought on because of her puberty. Just in the same way that puberty is the start of hormones growing, hair growing places that it shouldn't, growing taller and stuff like that. For Carrie, it's also the growing of her telekinetic abilities.
So it's puberty, just in a telekinetic sense.
Mm-hmm. So again, what we said before, Carrie's mom also creates a negative connection between puberty and experience. And then the final connection between puberty and negativity for Carrie is the ultimate one that pushes Carrie over the edge when she gets the pig's blood dumped over her. Obviously, the image of pig's blood being dumped on somebody can directly be a metaphor for period.
Mm-hmm.
So, and not only that, but the fact that it's specifically pig's blood Because that's often seen as like disgusting and diseased and vile, unlike human blood, which is seen as like life giving and connects to the soul and things like that. The fact that it's pig blood makes it so much worse,
Mm-hmm.
I think. Um, and just the way that the movie starts with Carrie having her period and ends with her being covered in pig's blood, it's kind of like a cyclical metaphor, a cyclical image, kind of
That's true.
bookmarking the film,
That
right?
is true. Yeah.
And the fact that they both, one is when she starts getting her powers, and the other one is when she actually uses her
She goes
powers.
batshit crazy.
um, and so obviously there's also the reoccurring theme of blood in the movie. Karen being covered in blood in the finale is not only an iconic image, but one that I think represents the wrath of the fully grown female, since blood is often associated with femininity, both in puberty and in childbirth.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, however, there's also a hidden masculinity to there is a hidden masculine fear in this movie that I noticed, since most of the scares and horrific imagery in this movie occurs when Carrie's on her period. It reinforces the idea of being afraid of a woman when she's on her period, since she is wild and unpredictable.
And you should. You should, Connor. Always buy ice cream and chocolates, okay?
Yeah.
Just want to calm her down.
So the final theme I noticed in the movie was the theme of femininity. And I think that femininity is a huge part of this movie, given that the vast majority of the cast is female.
Mm-hmm.
There's only two major male characters, Tommy Ross and Billy, John Travolta. And there are also very few scenes not featuring a female at all. So the other thing I noticed is the only two male characters, Tommy and Billy, are both controlled by the females in their lives.
That's true.
And they're like kind of the lesser ones in the relationship, not the dominant ones. The women are the dominant ones. Obviously, Tommy is told by his girlfriend, Sue, that he needs to take Carrie to the prom. And even though he doesn't really want to, he does it because Sue tells him to.
That's
like,
right.
He's not in charge, she is.
Yeah. A woman is always right.
And then the ironic thing is that he kind of eventually a little bit like falls for Carrie and kind of like likes her. Which again reinforces the fact that Carrie is now the one in charge of him. He
That's
is never
true.
in
Women
charge.
are always in control in this movie.
And then obviously the other male character, Billy, is controlled by his girlfriend, Chris, and is forced into tormenting Carrie. And what is interesting here is that even though Chris uses her sexuality to convince Billy to help her by giving him a blowjob, she also gets the help of all of Billy's friends and kind of cronies, because Chris is kind of smart enough and devious enough to realize that if she can control Billy, she can control all of his friends as well. So that's kind of what's interesting about this movie, is it's not just the males like scheming and plotting, it's the females, and they're really the driving force of the plot. Your protagonist Carrie, your antagonist and Chris, and Carrie's mother, and then kind of Sue being the pseudo friend and helpful one.
Mm-hmm.
And even the teacher, the gym teacher, I can't remember her name, but kind of the more like what a motherly role should have been for Carrie.
That's true.
So there's a lot of femininity going on in this movie, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. Is there any other thing that you want to add for that? For the themes?
Not really. I thought you did a really good job, actually, of tying all three together. Because I feel like they kind of go hand in hand, all of them.
Certainly, and yeah, I think that this movie kind of, it's a little heavy-handed in its themes, I think, but that's because I think Stephen King was so young at the time and hadn't kind of refined his craft, and that's what I also like about Misery. It's more like the themes are more kind of in the background for like the main story, but for Carrie, I think that the themes are right there in your face, and I think that's good as well, because
it's very effective.
Yeah,
right. Because
I mean, they're literally in your face with the pig's blood.
Haha.
So. Yeah, going on the final part, in my opinion, I really enjoy this movie. I think it's one of my favorite King adaptations, as I've already said. I love the 70s style and the fashion of the movie, and I think that is kind of like an amazing time capsule. And when I think of the 70s in terms of movies, literally the first two movies that come to my mind are this movie and Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah, well, John Travolta's in both
Exactly,
of them.
exactly. Um, Also, I think that it really actually accurately captures school life because King was a teacher, and I think that he was able to do that. And it really captures real life experience because it does a good job of capturing the style of and the characters and the dialogue, and because it is very accurate. I think like sometimes kids can be capable of extreme violence and hatefulness and stuff, but at the same time, I think that they can also be capable of great kindness and complexity. One of my favorite characters in the whole movie is Tommy Ross because he's like a very complex character in the sense that when you meet him for the first time in the movie, you think that he might be one of the bullies because he kind of hangs around with the wrong crowd and he's a jock and stuff. So you're like, oh, this guy's not gonna cause trouble for Carrie. But by the end of the movie, you realize that he's actually, very caring and kind and
One of the nicer characters of the bunch.
exactly. And he does kind of fall for Carrie because he's able to look past her like frumpy exterior and be like, she's actually a really nice girl on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's actually accurate to real life teenagers because I think most of the time when we see them, we think that
Well, they're just really focused on appearance.
yeah. And I think that inside some teenagers can be really capable of complexity and caring, and they're more than just what we see them on the outside at first. That's what I think Tommy captures perfectly, and why I really like him.
Nice.
So overall, I think this movie is successful because of the likability and the interesting characters, as well as it's a very fast-paced and effective story. It's one of Stephen King's shortest books.
Mm-hmm.
So even though it doesn't have a lot of gore or kills like what we associate good horror movies with, it still is a really quality movie. What do you think about the movie?
Well, you kind of said it all. Overall, I really liked. I really enjoyed the movie Carrie. I thought it was very effective, and conveying its major themes and messages like bullying, femininity, all that stuff. I thought it did a really good job. And it's just interesting to see, this is Stephen King's first book, or first horror novel, right?
Yeah, it was his first published novel. He had written a few others beforehand, but this was the first one to be published.
Okay, like that, and then also being the first Stephen King adaptation from the book. So I thought that was really cool, and, going through all the different movies he's done, looking back on it, I'm like, oh, okay, this is where it all started.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like seeing the transitions, and it always comes back to just the classic Carrie, and it's good. You have to see it.
Mm-hmm. I think that in the realm of Stephen King movies, there's certain iconic images like Danny on the tricycle, Misery or Annie Wilkes with the axe, Pennywise with the red balloon, and I think that Carrie, covered in blood, is
in her prom dress.
In the prom dress is up there with the most iconic images in all of Stephen King's works and all of horror.
And people that aren't necessarily into horror movies, they still know Carrie.
Oh yeah, my mom who has watched one horror movie in the last 25 years knows Carrie and knows the story really well too. So
yeah, it's something you don't forget.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Well, happy birthday, Stephen King.
Happy early birthday.
So that's it for us today, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What should we plug? Where can they find us at?
You can find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube, all under the name Spook Notes.
Mm-hmm.
If you have any questions, comments, and hopefully not concerns,
thoughts about what we discussed today?
Yep, thoughts or even future suggestions, you can email us at spooknotes@gmail.com. And yeah, we really hope you guys enjoy this podcast. We had a lot of fun doing it and kind of being secretive about what we were doing.
What we're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
I kind of like this format. We should do it again.
That's right.
And hopefully we'll be making podcasts a little bit more often now, being that Halloween's coming up.
That's right.
Less than 2 months away.
There's a lot of movies coming out. There's,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yep.
we gotta get on our boat, you know? We gotta create a routine here.
Exactly.
But yeah, we really appreciate you guys listening, and don't forget to cite the spook notes.
Bye.
Bye.